they look at you when they meet you and wonder if it's true, but they finally make a decision on what their experience with you personally is.
Although his interactions with his co-stars were far from ideal, Marlon Brando delivered a legendary performance in The Godfather. He was angry with Robert Duvall, said he would leave if Burt Reynolds was cast, and downplayed Al Pacino's performance. Many were irritated by Brando's erratic behavior, and he harbored deep-seated grudges. A victim of Brando's pranks was even James Caan, with whom he had laughed on set. Where did this animosity originate? The anarchy and competing identities that molded this masterwork of film hold the key. An acting paradigm shift occurred during Marlon Brando's early spectacular career. No one had ever seen anything like him before his 1947 Broadway debut in A Streetcar Named Desire. It was more than acting. His portrayal of Stanley Kowalski was intense, real, and left an indelible impression. Brando became an overnight star as Stella's scream reverberated across theaters. He received his first Oscar nomination in 1951 for his performance in the film adaptation of the play, in which he maintained the same level of intensity. Playing a role to the furthest extent possible, evoking a range of emotions in the audience, became the new standard for acting. On the Waterfront, released in 1954, solidified Brando's fame. Even though he was introduced to the role in A Streetcar Named Desire, Terry Malloy, a former boxer entangled in a moral dilemma, was portrayed by him. The now iconic remark "I could have been a contender" was not only an act, it was an act of unplanned magic delivered by him. Brando was unquestionably the finest actor of his time, and his first Academy Award came from that stunning performance. Marlon Brando won on the applause. Here is a small spread to entice you all. He had reached the pinnacle of success, but what transpired next stunned everyone. Brando's genius was accompanied with mayhem. He was more than an actor. He caused chaos in the filming studio. Brando insisted on fully immersing himself in the role of his paraplegic veteran character when making his debut picture in the 1950s. He remained in his wheelchair for weeks on end, requiring production personnel to push him about even when the cameras were not filming. It seemed like an addiction with a dash of devotion. When filming Julius Caesar in 1953 began, Brando was already known to openly taunt his co-stars, make fun of John Gielgud's British accent, and ask himself why bother learning my lines. His reliance on cue cards got so severe that it devastated the directors. Mutiny on the Bounty was the beginning of the end in 1962. Those were the renowned demands of Brando. He insisted on hundreds of takes for little moments, reworked screenplays daily, and stretched the film's budget well past its boundaries. The shoot, which was originally scheduled to last 14 weeks, ended up taking 10 exhausting months. His co-star Trevor Howard yelled out that he did not care what Brando did in his private life, but he would not put up with this continual sabotage of the film. Studio officials were understandably enraged because the production ran $6 million over budget. A new, less flattering label, Uncontrollable, had cast a shadow over Brando's once exalted genius status. The Hollywood A-lister quickly became its object of scorn. Brando had become devastating to movie theaters by the mid-1960s. His movies were a complete and utter flop. His appearances in the critically panned The Chase and The Night of the Following Day were a resounding failure. Critics panned the next one, Candy, a strange comedy. Critics said that Brando's performance as a guru was his worst work to date because of how cringeworthy it was. By 1972, the once mighty celebrity shine was dimming, and he was sorely in need of a miracle. And then, thanks to The Godfather, a miracle occurred. Casting Marlon Brando as Vito Corleone was more than simply a casting decision. It was a full-blown struggle for Francis Ford Coppola. In 1971, Brando's acting career had collapsed. Paramount thought he was bad for business. Laurence Olivier, Ernest Borgnine, and Danny Thomas were among the executives of the studio who had their own suggestions. Without a doubt, Brando was not their choice. Coppola was unconcerned, since in his mind Brando was Vito Corleone. Even though a prominent Paramount official had said Marlon Brando will never appear in this film, Coppola tried something daring when the studio declined. Visiting the elderly actor at his home on Mulholland Drive, he persuaded him to do the unthinkable, create a screen test. Although it was nearly embarrassing for an actor of Brando's caliber, he consented. Everything changed after that. Brando shocked everyone by completely changing himself for the screen test. At the age of 47, he used shoe polish to tame his blonde locks, stuffed Kleenex into his cheeks to imitate Vito's jowls, and took on a harsh, feeble voice that betrayed his past hurts. Minutes later, he was the elderly grandfather of the mafia. Even Paramount had to give up to the test's overwhelming strength. The part was offered to Brando, but he was asked to accept humiliating terms such as a significantly lower compensation than usual, $50,000, a $1 million bond to guarantee good behavior, and a vow to not tolerate any foolishness on set. Yet there was more drama than just Brando's battle. Michael Corleone was yet another adversary that Coppola had to deal with. Although the studio desired a celebrity, Coppola believed that the young and relatively unknown Al Pacino would be the ideal candidate to play Michael. Robert Redford, Jack Nicholson, and Warren Beatty were all considered, but none of them were a good fit for Coppola's vision. Paramount laughed at Pacino because he was too Italian and too short. Pacino had to go through a battery of increasingly difficult screen tests in order to satisfy the studio. Paramount even considered casting Carmine Coppola as Sonny and James Caan as Michael. At one time, Coppola wasn't going to budge from her stance on Pacino, even if she was desperate to move on. Despite the danger of losing his job, he battled valiantly for Pacino. Ultimately, a deal was struck. Pacino could portray Michael while Caan would play Sonny. Coppola may not have wanted this, but it served its purpose. It was obvious that production on The Godfather would not be without its share of problems. When filming began on March 29, 1971, the first day was a complete disaster. Construction debris was all throughout the Staten Island Corleone facility, indicating that it was not yet finished. It cost the company $40,000 to wait until the mess was removed before rolling the cameras. Even though things were looking bleak and the strain was starting to build, it was only the start. Marlon Brando came next. His reputation was just as erratic as his ways. Brando was adamant on utilizing cue cards in every scene. Memorizing lines, in his opinion, made performances seem forced. His goal was to have the speech flow more naturally, as in real life when individuals are trying to find the right words. You may find cue cards attached to lights, under props, or even on the foreheads of the performers. It perplexed some and irritated others, but Brando insisted on it. Still, Brando possessed brilliant moments. While filming the opening sequence, a feral cat accidentally walked onto the set. Brando didn't think twice about picking it up and starting to stroke it while he spoke. Even though Vito Corleone was a fantastic fit for the cat, it wasn't in the original screenplay. One of the most recognizable scenes in movie history is that spontaneous moment. How Brando could so deftly transform the bizarre into art astounded the team. Brando had another strange behavior. While he wasn't on camera, in the quiet moments between takes, he would pace the set, mouthing his lines, sensing the meter of the conversation. He referred to it as such. When the cameras were rolling, he had an irresistible charisma that others found weird. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Marlon Brando's notoriously tough demeanor during filming was already well known. He had already rejected conventional rehearsal methods by the time he was cast in The Godfather, opting instead to show up on set unprepared. He frequently irritated his co-stars and the crew with this approach. There was a nail-biting moment when Francis Ford Coppola, fuming by Brando's line-learning reluctance, threatened to read them aloud on camera. Unconcerned, Brando did nothing more than grin. It wasn't all drama either. Due to Brando's unpredictable temperament, the actor's antics entertained and baffled James Caan, who portrayed Sonny Corleone. Caan said I was his clown in a recent interview. Despite the tension, Caan and Brando had an odd bond. They would frequently laugh together amongst the craziness of Brando's unusual tactics, and Caan would lighten the situation by cracking jokes. While many enjoyed Brando's antics, others did not. "Well, my thoughts are Caan, what do you do? I'm being honest, in your face, thank you very much Mr. Brando," one person said. Actor Al Pacino, known for his method acting, frequently clashed with Brando's more relaxed approach. The legendary restaurant assassination scenario was the clearest example of this confrontation. Pacino became increasingly frustrated with Brando's carefree demeanor in between takes as he became engrossed in Michael Corleone's mental anguish. The animosity was exacerbated by the generational divide and their drastically divergent approaches to acting. There was an audible but subdued tense standoff. The film's ambiguous position involving Brando was another issue. Brando barely had an appearance for around 40 minutes out of the over 3-hour running length, even though he played the anonymous role of Vito Corleone. Brando was irked by Coppola's choice to elevate Michael's storyline over Vito's. He was unhappy and made it obvious that he felt eclipsed by Pacino's burgeoning stardom. But Coppola was unwavering. She knew that Michael's metamorphosis was the story's rightful owner. The ghost of Burt Reynolds though was the one thing that really set things off. Reynolds had a brief moment of consideration for the part during the casting process. Brando went ballistic as soon as he learned about it. Reynolds was the embodiment of everything he found repulsive in performers and he hated him for it. "If he steps on the set, I walk." Brando's deep-seated and decades-long hatred for Reynolds led him to go to extreme lengths, even threatening to resign if Reynolds joined the ensemble. The final day of filming The Godfather seemed like a little success for Reynolds, who would later attack Brando on Saturday Night Live. But Francis Ford Coppola believed it was empty. The months of uncertainty and stress that plagued him persisted even after finishing the film 6 days early. Every day, he fought the terror that it may be his final as a director. In addition to his conflicts with the performers, the studio, and the demanding shoot, when the unfathomable weight of it all finally got to Coppola, Martin Scorsese discovered her in tears on sight. However, the true test was still ahead. The debut of the picture would either solidify his perspective or validate the skepticism of each critic who had opposed him. The Godfather was a smashing success when it opened in theaters on March 15, 1972. In its first 5 days of release, the picture set an unprecedented record with daily grosses of $1 million. At the conclusion of its theatrical run, it had grossed $250 million to $291 million worldwide, which is more than $1.5 billion in today's dollars. People were enthralled. There were long lines outside the theaters, and for a short time, cannoli, one of the highlighted foods, was temporarily out of stock across the country. Why did the movie strike such a chord with its audience? Critics said that wrapped in Coppola's own storytelling, it was more than a mob story. It was an epic about power, family, and treachery. Trouble was brewing for the crew behind The Godfather as it skyrocketed to fame. With 11 nominations by March 1973, The Godfather had established itself as a heavyweight contender for the 45th Academy Awards. Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay were among its 3 accolades. Best Actor went to Marlon Brando as well for his legendary turn as Vito Corleone. The event, however, veered off course. Instead of accepting the honor in person, Brando dispatched Native American activist Sacheen Littlefeather to do it on his behalf. Nothing moved in the room as Littlefeather stepped onto the stage. She gracefully declined the Oscar while dressed in traditional Apache regalia, stating that she understood Brando's choice. His rejection had nothing to do with the movie. Rather, it was a demonstration against the way Native Americans have been portrayed in Hollywood and the continuing Wounded Knee occupation, in which protesters and federal agents were engaged in a tense confrontation. Chaos broke out as a result of Littlefeather's brief speech. The famed Western hero John Wayne allegedly tried to assault the stage, and 6 security officers had to hold him back. The varied responses from the crowd reflected the partisan divide in the nation about civil rights matters. Unapologetic, Brando eventually made public the whole 8-page speech. It could not have been delivered by Littlefeather. It criticized the entertainment industry for its role in perpetuating systemic racism and went into further detail on how Hollywood portrayed Native Americans. However, the consequences were severe. Following the incident, Littlefeather said that she was blacklisted from the Hollywood industry. She fell into oblivion after an acting career that had promise. The Academy did not publicly apologize for the abuse she had suffered until 2022, decades after the fact, recognizing the bravery it required to stand on that stage and confront the criticism. Marlon Brando's chemistry with his co-stars in The Godfather was just as multifaceted as their on-screen personas. Brando grew emotionally detached after the film's unprecedented popularity. Speculation about his relationship status increased when he failed to attend reunions, such as the much-anticipated 10th anniversary in 1982. Even Pacino, who supposedly felt the cold shoulder because of this absence, noticed it. Years later, during the frantic production of Apocalypse Now, the true shock occurred. The media took notice of Brando's unpreparedness and rapid weight gain. Francis Ford Coppola, who had before praised Brando for The Godfather, was shocked to see that Brando had not prepared for the set by reading the screenplay or researching his character. Coppola allegedly had a breakdown as the situation got even worse on top of the film's logistical problems. Even Brando's Godfather co-star Robert Duvall was irritated, describing Brando's actions as disruptive and pointless. Their friendly relationship started to fall apart. Even in his infrequent interviews, Brando rarely minced words, and they frequently had an edge to them. Al Pacino had looked up to Brando, but in a surprising 1979 interview with Truman Capote for Playboy, Brando belittled Pacino's abilities, stating he is a good actor but not a great one. Pacino was hurt by this criticism. There were rumblings of animosity in Hollywood, but Pacino refrained from openly retaliating. Reflecting on his career, Pacino said Marlon was a giant, but his criticism did not define him or me. This was his high-minded attitude. Years later, however, there were times when Brando was not so harsh. In an interview from 1994, he talked highly of James Caan, complimenting his portrayal as Sonny Corleone. Jimmy had this energy and fury that was perfect for the role, according to him. This too was accompanied with a subtle jab. Decades later, in her book, Diane Keaton offered perhaps the most unexpected revelation. In an interview with Keaton, Brando admitted to making nude love overtures while filming The Godfather. Marlon had this magnetic charm, she recalled, but he was also intimidating. I never knew if he was joking or serious when he flirted. Keaton's remembrance brought an additional dimension to the set dynamics, showcasing Brando's mysterious attitude. Beyond reviving Brando's career, The Godfather revolutionized film. Instead of glitzy gunfights, it emphasized moral depth and familial relationships, reimagining the gangster genre. Mobster characters went from villains to heroes, anti-heroes, and tragic people all of a sudden. Even after the film's success at the box office, its influence on popular culture was undeniable. Podcasts analyzed its themes, computer games lifted its plot, and rap artists like Snoop Dogg cited it in their songs. Beyond its previous status as a film, it had become a cultural model. Beyond its surface impact, nevertheless, the picture had far-reaching consequences. Because of that, Hollywood began to depict Italians differently. Caricatures of them were commonplace prior to The Godfather. By showing Italian Americans as complex, fully formed individuals, the film gave them a human face. Tom Santopietro summed it up well when he said it Italianized American culture. The clones followed. All that followed was built upon the foundation laid by The Godfather. It is essential to the existence of Goodfellas, Casino, and most importantly, The Sopranos. Director David Chase has acknowledged the picture as an influence on his work on The Sopranos. Building on themes established by Coppola, his series explored the mental toll of juggling the roles of family man and mafia leader. The film made an impression even when it was not a crime film. Rembrandt lighting, a term used to describe the film's cinematography, became instantly recognizable. There have been several tributes and parodies based on the baptism scene, which juxtaposes the purity of a child's christening with violent mob attacks. The Godfather is still a benchmark even after all this time has passed. Its universal themes, loyalty, family, the price of ambition, and the American dream's corruption remain relevant today. Producers watch each scenario in great detail, and viewers often paraphrase its phrases. It is more than a film. It is an enduring legacy. That is not, however, the full tale. Apocalypse Now was an incredibly turbulent production that almost ruined everyone involved, and Brando was riding high on the success of The Godfather when he took it on. This time, the mayhem on set was much more difficult to contain, but the events that unfolded would reshape Brando's career.